Good morning, everyone. For the French who have just joined us, you have under your screen the possibility of choosing between French and English language through hearing channels. If you want to listen to translation in French, under your screen on the right, you will find an icon that may allow you to choose the hearing language. We have both languages, French and English.
Thank you, Pascal. Okay, if we can have the next slide, please, Naomi. Well, welcome all to this conference on net zero carbon homes, and does off-site construction provide a solution? A little bit of housekeeping first of all. Due to the size of the audience, please mute your microphones. If you do have any questions you'd like to ask, please do use the chat box functionality. We'll all be aware of those. And also we'll be using your mobile phones to run something called Menti polls, and we'll explain that in a few minutes time. And all the slides and the event is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. So if you would like to use them afterwards, you'll be able to get those, and we'll circulate the link around to everybody. So what I propose to do now is go to Menti. So to Menti, so I need you to pick up your mobile phones, and we're going to have some questions that we're going to be asking you. So whilst you're doing that, I'm just spending a moment to pick up your phones. Once you pick up your phone, you need to go to your internet browser, and in your internet browser, you need to type in www.menti.com. And when you get to there, I can see some of you are already there, you need to put in the code 90389537, and then that will allow you to participate in our Menti sessions, which we'll be using throughout the next 2 hours throughout the conference, to allow the audience to participate in the conference and ask various questions of the panel, etc., etc. So hopefully we'll just ask a few questions to start with, just to get you all in the get you all used to using the various systems. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. If we may, we've got 34, 36 people have managed to get onto the system, which is great. I'm at 39, so the numbers are going up, which is great. Got another section for you, question for you, and in that question you can see there, which role do you work in within the off-site industry? Are you designer, manufacturer, logistics, construction, professional services, facilities management, or are you academic? So it's just giving us an idea of who the audience is. Great, we get the votes are coming in. It's a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest, this, and I'm told that the UK will get more than 0 points this week, which is good. Right, so we've got at least 50 here, which is great. We've got 87 participants in total. So yeah, hopefully we've got another 30 or so people still to get onto menti.com and put in the Menti code 90389537, which you see at the top of the screen there. So hopefully get as many as you possible participating in that. So interesting, we've got a good selection of people on a good cross-section of people on the call, from design and architecture through to off-site manufacturers, and then people involved in on-site construction and assembly, and then through to professionals and academics as well. Interesting, nobody from the logistics side and nobody from FM, so in terms of looking after the building in the long term. But that gives us a good understanding of who's actually on the call. So moving on to our next question, and we've got 60 people voting now. So In the UK and just generally, in terms when you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, targets have been set for us to get to net zero by 2050. The UK government has signed up to a target to net zero carbon by 2045. And how confident do we feel that we'll achieve that net zero target by 2045? And Pascal, can I ask you to come in there? Because obviously in the UK, got a very strong government driver in terms of setting legislation, putting it in law that we've got to hit that target by that date, which begs the question that if we don't hit the target by that date, does the whole government go to prison, which is probably an incentive not to hit the target by 2045. But I'm not sure, Pascal, what's the situation in France in terms of legislation and leadership from government? Looks like my colleague Pascal is struggling to hear us for whatever reason. Yeah, Pascal, I was just making a comment. In France, from a government perspective, from an industry leadership perspective, net zero by 2045, 2050.
Oui. Donc, bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you now.
I don't know if I can hear you. Good morning, everyone. And like you know, everyone, France is engaged in a strategy, a net zero strategy in the horizon of 2045-2050. And this is translated, extrapolated by a couple of legislations in construction field of the IRA 2020, which is arriving and going through the lowering the carbon emissions, like several countries who is going to engage in a strategy of net zero carbon emissions.
Thank you, Pascal. If we move on to our next question then, which is our last question before we dive into the subject for this afternoon. Why are we focusing on residential buildings? Well, because residential buildings account for a significant percentage of any country's national carbon emissions. So don't know if you want to vote, just cast your vote. Is it 10%, 20% or 30%? Or even at 40% even. So if you want to give us your figure and think your best estimate of where you think we are with that. The votes are beginning to come in. Okay, so as the votes keep on coming in, why is this important? The actual figure in the UK is 30%. 30% of national carbon emissions come from the residential buildings. You can see therefore why it is so important for us to tackle the concept of zero carbon homes, and how can we as an industry deliver zero carbon homes going forward. That will clearly deal with the building stock going forward, any new building that we build from today onwards, and a contribution towards net zero. So that's one big challenge as an offsite industry we've got. How can we contribute to that? But I think the subject for another conference we've got to come up in about a month's time is we've also got to look at retrofitting the 80% of the buildings, the residential stock, which will be here in 2050. 80% of that residential stock has already been built. So how do we make sure that we retrofit that going forward? So that's a topic for another day. But when we consider 30% of national emissions are coming from the residential building stock, it's really clearly very important that we actually deal with this issue. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into having a look at offsite systems and which offsite systems provides the best whole life carbon solution. And I'm pleased to say we've got 3 different speakers that we're introducing to give an overview regarding the various systems which are available. So here we're looking at, is it timber, is it concrete, is it steel systems, is it a hybrid solution that we're looking for, is it a traditional solution? And I'm pleased to say we've got Nigel Fraser from Buildoffsite in the UK. I've got Emmanuel from Architects in France, and we've got Bruno from Bouygues Construction in France as well. Obviously, we've got timber and concrete represented there, and Nigel from Buildoffsite will give an overview. So if I may hand over to Nigel now. Nigel.
Thank you, Ian. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so next slide. There are two questions here, I think. There's, does offsite construction provide the solution to net zero carbon homes? And which of the systems provides the best whole life carbon solution? And we're going to consider both of these questions in the next few slides. Next one, please. So how can we create the net zero carbon homes? Obviously, part of it is building with minimal embodied carbon. We then have to operate them with as little carbon as we can, and possibly absorb carbon using that building and the technology in it too. And we have the opportunities to generate surplus renewable energy. And if we take all those things together, one could imagine achieving a net zero carbon situation. Next slide, please. But as Ian has just alluded to in the forthcoming session, we also need to look at upgrading the houses that we've already built, and that's a very large park. So, does offsite construction provide a solution for new homes? We can certainly contribute to building with reduced embodied carbon. If you're building in a factory, then we can control the waste and reduce the waste more easily. We have higher productivity. We can use new processes that are more difficult to apply on a construction site, such as 3D printing and robotics. Large-scale 3D printing is challenging, but on a smaller scale, it's more accessible. We can reduce the amount of overall transport used, a lot less deliveries to site, and more effective use of the space within the delivery vehicles. And we can use less energy if we're doing it in an optimized manufacturing and assembly process, rather than the amount of work and rework, etc., that typically happens on a construction site. In terms of the homes that are then built operating with reduced carbon, the data that we've seen in previous studies indicates that it's easier to have robust details that make buildings more airtight, and it's easier to implement tighter control processes within the production facility than it is on the site. So on that basis, there is a reason to assume that we can create buildings that are more efficient and better in that respect. Next slide, please. So, does it provide a solution for new homes? I think that when you start looking at the standards that are used by specifiers, it's easier to incorporate low carbon technologies into products and to be able to provide warranties on that than it is to do so with traditional methods. So I think that in a way, offsite provides a different way in for newer technologies. The homes obviously can be designed for deconstruction and reuse. We don't see a lot of that at the moment, but there are examples where, for example, additional accommodation is required for family members when they become disabled or something like that, and we've seen temporary extensions to homes that can be then moved somewhere else when needed elsewhere. We've seen the sort of integration of renewable energy and other low carbon solutions into sub-assemblies in factories more safely than working on roofs and the like, and we can typically do that at a lower cost in a factory. And another reason that we think the route to market is a bit easier is we've pioneered the Buildoffsite property assurance scheme, which allows for new technologies and new systems to be thoroughly assessed and accredited so that they are insurable and financeable when they come to market. And you kind of need all of those things to make it happen. Next slide, please. So when we look at existing homes, it all becomes a bit more challenging, and people might think that offsite is less relevant. But actually, most existing homes are currently being lived in. So when we do work on them, we really don't want to impact the occupants any more than we have to. And it's often not feasible to remove everything from a home in order to rework on it. And one of the approaches that could be adapted is to use 3D scanning to enable very detailed plans to be made before going to a home to install new systems, and to pre-prepare many of the components that are going to be needed when you update the house. That does provide the opportunity for doing renovation work and upgrading room by room, rather than having to do the whole house and displace the occupants. So it is a form of offsite, but it's a different form of offsite. Next slide, please. So one of the tricky questions for me, because Buildoffsite is agnostic when it comes to different systems, is which offsite system provides the best whole life carbon solution. And fortunately, that depends upon the context. Some designs require a lot of insulation and a lot of thermal mass to be incorporated, not necessarily both, but there are different ways of achieving good environmental performance. The time frame is significant, and what happens to the building at the end of its life, and to what extent that can be recycled, and that varies between different systems. The ability to design a building for long-term protection and extended durability is significant. And again, there are technologies emerging that are improving that all the time. And clearly, buildings need to be designed for maintenance. That's always been the case, but we need to factor in the carbon aspect of that, which probably hasn't been in the past. And the other factor that comes into this is, the work that's happening in the steel and the concrete sectors to reduce the embedded carbon in those materials, which are pretty important for construction in the current way of delivering what we're building. Next slide, please. Have the next slide, please. Yeah, so in conclusion, I think we can see ways where offsite construction offers a number of significant parts to the solution. Site requirements and constraints and the availability of local resources will ultimately influence which technologies are the most suitable. But on the whole, we ought to see the offsite sector provide quite a bit of the opportunity for achieving net zero carbon housing. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this.
Very much, Nigel. what we'll now do is move on to Emmanuel, and Emmanuel will give us a view from the timber side. Emmanuel, if I may introduce you now.
Oui. Bonjour.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Emmanuel, an architect. I will speak about wood material as a solution adapted of off-site construction of zero net carbon. We have realized a couple of projects with wood. I am convinced that this material is really interesting in our solution that we are offering for different reasons. I will detail today. Next slide. The principal aspect of wood or timber require a dry process and water efficiency as well. It is really easy to manufacture and using 3D. So the wood or the timber let the make the construction of site really simple and easy. Also, it can reduce the waste and in terms of nuisance and other waste, it is a really proper material and can facilitate the work of in prefabrication and reduce the transport and other issues on the side. We can use the wood on site for this approach. Next slide. The timber is a recyclable resource, and in interest of recycling housing, we can make various recyclable and to use in complement of wood the use of bio-based material and other materials issued of certain bio-based also material which favor making short circuits, and it is really crucial of reducing carbon. And what is happening around the world at the moment regarding wood, from my perspective of an architect, which is to make sure the availability of wood used in certain construction sites. Next slide. So the timber, which is regarding the transformation of CO2, is really a magical material. So it is, he will stock the CO2, which is also more interesting in timber construction, the multiple uses of this resource for structural elements and filling elements as well. Here also we have a really exploited area and reduce the waste for using timber. Next slide. In a matter of comfort, the timber itself is self-isolating naturally, is naturally insulating material. If we can prevent hypothermia for the if we complete with another insulation material, we have a an envelope naturally used to make use of timber more efficient. Next slide.
Alors, un point important, puisqu'on est là pour construire des logements.
A really important point in matter of housing construction. We have noticed from 15 years ago that timber is really good for well-being and housing construction. I have made several of construction that showed that in certain houses made of timber, it has assured living comfort, and it is really interesting to use in quality of olfactory and hygrometric qualities. And this is all of these elements make that timber contribute to living comfortably, and it's indispensable for houses constructed. Next slide.
Et bon, pour revenir à la construction hors site et au bois, effectivement, le bois.
So for the offsite construction, the wood or the timber is really suitable for offsite buildings, which is used in multiple forms and uses, either 2D or 3D. We can use for structural buildings, and also filling purposes in matter of density and all the possibilities of using wood in all the component of the building. This is what I can tell you today about the wood as a material adapted to offsite construction, reducing the carbon. The wood itself is evident as a material on low carbon.
De tout le circuit de transformation.
All the transformation circuit of wood is really interesting, and it is not only the material that we have to care about.
Voilà. Merci pour votre écoute.
Thank you for your interest.
Thank you, Emmanuel. That was an interesting insight into the use of wood, and very interesting that you were able to pull out how wood can be used as timber frame or CLT, cross-laminated timber, or it can be used for two-dimensional or 3D fully volumetric systems. So thank you for that. Now let's move on and have a look at a different type of material, which is concrete. And we've got Bruno from Bouygues, who's joining us to talk about the benefits and the use of concrete as an offsite solution. So Bruno, good afternoon.
Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour, merci. Donc je me présente.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I am Bruno Lineat. I am Choisir Construction. Our friends have proposed to present this construction. I have appreciated all the intervention of Manuel. The construction is reinforced for a couple of years ago, and the wood use also. I want to have a few words about the timber construction or wood construction, about the quality of reducing carbon, which is durable wood use from forests, maintained and durability on long term. In our resources of wood in France, Bouygues Construction is majorly a construction company that uses this on a regular basis. So 30% of construction are mixed of using wood. I'm speaking about structure majorly, and by 2030 we will reach the 30% of wood.
Évidemment, on sait que c'est un mauvais client pour le carbone, un gros client en tout cas.
So the
Construction hors site, si on peut présenter la
concrete is what we are speaking So we are exploring through the world, around the world, like in Singapore. I'm waiting for the slide. The prefabrication of concrete is represented of the 3D module, like you're seeing in front of you. This is the factory of Singapore. We are working on 3 axes to reduce the carbon. The first one is the organization of construction and the process, and the associated logistics. It concerns ourselves on working on reducing carbon. We can simply use a construction site in Singapore and another factories maybe, and we are trying to integrate the technology of reducing carbon, and this is in the first time to permit to negate our carbon balance sheet. Our colleagues are working on the subject, and the responses are not very evident. In the center of France, you're not very local. All the workers, our clients want to have the factory really close to their construction site. For this reason, we wanted to make ephemeral factories to make the wish of our clients, and the balance is really different in this case. In terms of logistics, the carbon gain is really appreciated using this technology, and the other acts of the solution that we are offering is a module of a tower in Singapore, a twin tower in Singapore that we will be seeing in the next slide. Actively, we are really approaching that the 3D modular is really cool, but we have to multiply by two the. We have to multiply by 2 the wall, and it is 2 of products used in this issue. What we have to say is, with this procedure, we have reduced the material, which is concrete, essentially, and to reduce the balance of carbon using this solution. And the client also have other aspirations of reducing the surface of concrete. The sound is cutting, which is something really compatible with what we are doing nowadays. The next photo is the final image of the construction with high performance. And they are towers with great mechanical performance. The third axis of our action to reduce the balance of carbon. In the next slide, in the next photo, is the partnership that we have with the fabricants. We had 2 years ago. I am based in Nantes, in France. This company developed a cement with low rates of carbon, and we use with them to divide by 5 this carbon rates. They have 2 products with great interest.
L'autre travaille sur des argines calcinées. En tout cas, ce sont des bétons.
They are cement, that permit to make concrete with low rates of carbon. For certain that know the subject, that prefabrication is compatible with this cement, and in effect, it is compatible for construction off-site. The resistance in an early age to manipulate the pieces and make a performance cycle is really good, and we have an interesting results. And the both sides we hope that we have low weight carbon cement using reducing material use, and from that reducing the carbon weight and our emissions. And I hope using such solutions for this construction. We cannot throw out the concrete, and we have to work on his reduced impact instead. Thank you, Bruno. I think that concrete is it's quite normal.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Pascal. So we've just heard there from timber and from concrete, and we had the overview from Nigel from Buildoffsite, and very interesting there that Bruno is looking at those 3 factors to reduce the levels of carbon within concrete: more efficient construction processes, reducing the volume of concrete, and looking at cement substitutes as well. And some very interesting innovation to look at there. Certainly, if we can reduce the cement element of carbon by 80%, which if my maths works correctly, dividing it by 5, which would be great. So we're going to have a panel discussion now, and to help with this panel discussion, we will ask 4 questions. And the first question is on the Mentimeter. So if you'd like to go back to your Mentimeter phones, everybody, and answer the question, in this case, which system has potential, or which system or material has potential to have the lowest embodied carbon? And we're going to ask in a moment a question about in use, but at the moment we're looking at embodied carbon. Got timber, concrete, steel. So just why the votes are coming in. Nigel, you mentioned in your talk that it's really important to choose the right system for the right project. There isn't a simple answer to this. We're being too simple.
There isn't. I mean, for example, I would expect people to say timber, and that's what's coming through on the survey. But that comes back to, what time period are we talking about? And it's possible to imagine timber. I mean, for example, in America, a lot of buildings, a lot of houses are built with timber, but the assumed lifespan of those buildings is relatively short, and a lot depends on what happens to the timber at the end of the lifespan. Whereas one could argue that buildings constructed in concrete or steel may be more durable, or be made to be almost indefinitely endurable. But then there are also very old buildings made of timber in Japan. So a lot depends on how it's designed and the whole life cycle perception of what is being designed, and then how relevant that design remains to society over time. So we start off by saying that timber has got less embedded carbon, but I don't think that is always going to be the case in the longer term. As I say, depending on what happens in terms of longevity of the building and what happens to the materials once the building is deconstructed.
Thank you, Nigel. So it's very interesting that we need to look at not just the embodied carbon, but the carbon in use. So our next question, if we just put our next question, is looks at which system enables the lowest energy use by the occupier. And again, there's probably no right or wrong answer to this, and a lot's got to do with the quality of the manufacture in the first place, etc., etc. But we ask the question anyway. But what seems to me is very important here is that we need to consider the embodied carbon within the materials. We need to consider the carbon during the use of the building, so that, you know, to what degree are we heating the building, cooling the building, lighting the building, etc. So what carbon is going to be used during its lifetime, and then at the end of its life as well. And Nigel mentioned this, at the end of its life, how do we recover the carbon within it? How do we decommission the building? Bruno, coming in and to ask you a question on that. When you're designing your buildings, do you design and consider embodied carbon? Clearly you do, but do you also consider the in-use carbon of the building as well?
Je ne suis pas sûr d'avoir compris la question complète.
Est-ce que, Bruno, est-ce
Can
que...
you reformulate your question?
I can translate, Bruno.
Oui.
La question, c'est, vous considérez le
Do
carbone...
you consider the carbon
et
like
aussi,
as a material?
Bruno. Donc, la question, c'est est-ce que vous...
The question is,
carbone.
The question is, like I asked,
J'ai pas entendu la moitié de la question, Pascal. Je suis désolé.
I didn't hear the half of the question.
Usama,
There is
I
interrupt.
translate to Bruno, please. Usama, I want to translate to Bruno. OK. Bruno, donc la question, c'est chez Bouygues, quand vous concevez un bâtiment en béton,
So Pascal is translating for Bruno because he cannot hear.
vous considérez la...
Do you consider the
le carbone lors de la
carbon in construction or
Bien sûr.
during
Bien sûr.
exportation?
Nous travaillons
Can you
sur
hear
les-
me?
évidemment, sur la construction.
We work on both sides,
Sur la
construction and
important volet économique
dismantlement and
dans nos développements. Et déjà, concentrons-nous sur la construction.
we were concentrated on construction and also that concrete and steel, which I have detailed earlier, and we work on the energetic performance during our buildings. And when we construct buildings that use lower energy levels,
que nous mettons en place est soit renouvelable, ou alors au pire, ça dépend après du bouquet énergétique des pays, mais en France, lorsqu'on met des énergies électriques, c'est plutôt favorable en termes de carbone. Et je voudrais insister sur le fait que souvent, les défenseurs du bois mettent en avant la performance énergétique en termes d'isolation du bois. C'est vrai que le bois est très isolant, mais c'est trompeur. Il ne faudrait pas se contenter de ça parce que ça ne saurait pas servir le bois. Le bois a d'autres atouts. Parce que le béton, en termes d'isolation thermique, est capable de faire également très bien, non pas tout seul, mais avec les isolants que l'on rajoute. Une structure en béton bien isolée est très performante, aussi performante qu'une structure en bois. Avec un autre avantage, peut-être, je dis bien peut-être, c'est l'été. Depuis quelques années, vous aurez noté que le pic de consommation électrique en France n'est plus en hiver, il est en été. Et en été, le béton a un gros atout, c'est l'inertie thermique qui peut diminuer un petit peu la consommation de climatisation. Donc, c'est bel et bien en concevant un immeuble pour l'été comme l'hiver, dans tout son cycle de vie, en y réfléchissant bien et en mélangeant les solutions, en mettant de l'inertie, que l'on peut avoir un bâtiment qui émette beaucoup moins de carbone dans sa durée de vie. Voilà. Il n'y a pas de solution simple et unique, ça serait trop facile.
Et on peut peut-être mélanger les matériaux entre eux, quelque part
Exactement.
dans la recherche du meilleur matériau au meilleur endroit.
Exactement.
On voit apparaître de plus en plus fréquemment dans les solutions proposées par les entreprises et par les architectes.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Pascal. If we can move on to our next question, please. And this is a question for the audience. I'd like to understand to what degree those contractors on the call and those architects on the call are working to minimize lifetime carbon and embodied carbon of the units that they're designing construction currently. So we've asked the experts what they're doing. Quite clear that our panelists are considering lifetime carbon and embodied carbon. But as you in your day-to-day jobs, are you actually doing it? Don't worry, we're not recording everybody's individual answers, so you can answer truthfully. And I'm sure my colleague Charles is trying to find our translator, who seems to have dropped off the call. Okay, so we've got on there number 18. So yeah, yes, part of the standard process, which is really, really pleasing to see that. Prioritize embodied carbon, we're prioritizing lifetime carbon. So it's encouraging to see that we are actually doing it, but also encouraging, not very encouraging to see that a few people are not looking at carbon currently, and some people are only doing it when their customer asks for it, which is a nice segue into our next question. Our next question is, are residential customers asking for more sustainable homes? And here, Pascal, I'll ask you to come in on this as well, because the marketplace in France is quite different from the marketplace in the UK, isn't it? In the UK, we have some large house builders, you have the likes of your Barratts and Persimmon, Countrywide and the like, who are doing residential to sell. And then we've also got the large developers who are doing social housing, but not much self-build, not much individually commissioned homes. So Pascal, how do you see the French market being different to the English market?
Alors, je crois qu'en France, on voit...
I think in France, we have a perception of, from really, not really, in a couple of years, we have a demand, higher demand to go for construction of net carbon, and it is assessed with the government strategy. We have higher demands from certain cities to have buildings with low carbon, and we have emerging a certain requests from cities to make construction, offsite construction, with a way to reduce the carbon impact and reduce the impact of nuisance on the construction site. I think that we have this phenomenon growing consistently. We don't have enough, all the solutions at the moment. As you know, France is a country that we have invented the cement, and we have companies of constructions and really professional and efficient. And the construction in France is concrete construction on construction side, and we have consistently seeing this change, like the we company this with its level of 2030, and the France is really changing, and we have understood that we need this change, and from different actors.
Thank you, Pascal. Nigel, can I ask you to come back in on this question? In terms of drivers for low carbon buildings, to what degree is it customers, or to what degree is it legislation and building regulations?
Sorry, and I'm getting a bit confused with the French translation and the English.
Want me to ask the question again?
Yeah, because I had to switch over to French for the last presenter.
No problem at all. So just coming back in on this question, to what degree is it building regulations and government legislation which is changing the way we build, or to what degree is it the final consumer asking for lower carbon buildings?
Well, I think your point about the UK market being a bit different to the French is significant in that in the main, the properties that are developed for the private market are built rather speculatively and then either bought off plan or bought through standard show homes, etc. The housing association clients within those developments, those larger developments, are often specifying higher degrees of sustainability than provided as a base offering for a lot of the private sector, but the private sector purchasers of more individual homes are tending to specify quite highly in terms of the sustainability criteria. And when you look at the build to rent market, then the whole life cost becomes much more significant because the commissioner of the project has a long-term interest in the buildings. So I think you need to segment the market to get a feel for that, and it's different in different segments.
Thank you, Nigel. So probably right for us to conclude this section then, yeah. So just by way of summary then, I think we've looked at various systems, and thank you to Bruno, and thank you to Nigel, and thank you to Emmanuel for their input. Basically, we need to be looking at different systems for different projects, and we need to understand what's driving each individual project. But we also need to understand what the final consumer is going to be. Is it a housing association project? Is it for somebody for sale to the private market? Is it being developed by a housing developer, or is it being developed as an individual site for individual end user? So lots for us to consider. Lots for us to consider as well, in the fact that the materials and their carbon footprint is significantly changing, because we heard from Bruno on what's happening regarding cement and concrete. We heard from Emmanuel about the qualities that wood bring us, and I know also that the steel industry is struggling as well to look at how it reduces its carbon footprint as well. So when we're looking at volumetric hybrid systems using cold rolled steel and mild steel, those systems are changing going forward as well. So a lot of work to be done on the manufacturer's side to understand what the embodied carbon is. But offsite does seem to give us a solution for having higher quality of products which are built, and where we control the performance of the as-built building. And I think that's where the offsite solutions can really give us an advantage over traditional construction in terms of the performance of the building, and in the UK what we call closing the performance gap. We'll now be moving on to our second discussion panel, roundtable discussion, where we're going to be looking at how to accelerate the use of offsite in the housing market. So what are the drivers and what are the experience that we've got from the UK and the French market of how we could learn potentially, what's accelerated it in France, what's accelerated it in the UK? And to start off this subject, I'm asking the production innovation lead at L&Q, which is a housing association here in the UK. Lomray is going to give us an overview of how he's sought to increase the level of offsite in their developments across the UK housing market. So Lomray, over to yourself.
Excellent, thank you, Ian. I'll share my screen and get started. You can just give me a bit of a thumbs up if you can see that, hopefully.
Yes, it's a thumbs up from me, Lomray.
Excellent. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Especially welcome to our international colleagues at offsite. It's a pleasure to be presenting to you this afternoon. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be focusing on some of the ways in which I guess we have been adapting ourselves to be better ready to adopt offsite, but also hopefully some insights into how maybe as a wider industry we could also head in that direction. I'll be looking at particular reference to how we've been undertaking our innovation roadmap over the last 3.5 years or so. Okay, so just a little bit about the who, why and where in terms of L&Q. We are a regulated housing association. And we actually came together or began life as a housing association many years ago in October 1963, when a group of 32 young professionals came together in London and each invested £2 to establish the organisation. So if you fast forward nearly 60 years, that investment of £64 has now become a £12 billion social business. We deliver a range of housing across multiple tenures, alongside obviously associated management and maintenance services. In the UK, we house over 250,000 residents in over 105,000 homes. And whilst our core operating area has typically been in London and the Southeast, we are now operating a little bit more nationally, beyond home counties as far north as Manchester with our Trafford housing business as well. Okay, so in terms of, I guess, offsite and MMC, I guess in the UK over the last probably decade and a bit or so, there's been obviously a greater push since the publication of the construction strategy in 2012 and the construction 25 strategy document, which followed it shortly after in 2013. The latter document sets out a vision and plan for long-term strategic action by government working with industry to continue to promote the success of the UK construction sector, with a particular focus on growth in markets such as green technologies, smart construction, and obviously looking at overseas trade as well to export some of this really good work. More recently, we've had the Modernise or Die report, which is obviously an independent review of the UK's construction labour model by Mark Farmer, and I brought into stark view the, I guess, construction sector challenges and some of the limiting factors with recommendations as to how we could alleviate some of those. I think it's had quite a significant impact in terms of galvanizing the industry and government into action over the last 4 years or so, with a significant investment being made into the sector as a whole to push forward innovation, of which obviously MMC is a part of. So the major kind of challenges that we're obviously looking to address right across the board are really around obviously creating, from our sector particularly in terms of housing, creating, plus 300,000 homes per annum, significantly improving quality and performance, and obviously critically addressing the productivity issue and making ourselves more efficient as a sector. So for us, in terms of our journey, one of the key things we really wanted to do was get a better understanding of the actual problem that we face within construction, particularly when we think about productivity. So we've kind of looked outside of the sphere, so to speak, and looked beyond into other sectors and began to look at really maybe some of the lessons that we could learn from the manufacturing industry. So for us, it's very much about taking what we do really well in terms of traditional design and construction and beginning to look at what they do really well in the manufacturing industry and beginning to see whether we could get the best of both worlds. So what we have in the middle is what we think to be obviously a very good, I guess, process and methodology in the form of design for manufacture and assembly. But for us as a housing association and a manager of stock as well, we want to obviously consider maintenance in terms of long-term whole life cycle kind of operations of our assets as well. Alongside that, obviously, we've got all the emerging technologies that are associated with Industry 4.0 in terms of automation, Internet of Things, cloud computing, and autonomous robots and additive manufacturing, all this fun stuff. All of that is very much in our minds as well, looking forward into the future. But when we think about, I guess, construction being more aligned to the manufacturing sector, I think we really need to try and focus on those three properties when we think about mass producing products and comparing that to how we could potentially do this in the construction sector. So those three, I guess, pillars, if you want to call them that, are repetition, volume, and typology. So those three items really looking to kind of capture some element of, I guess, standardization with the repetition and reusing that optimally, and then obviously hoping to get a good amount of volume in terms of numbers to be able to make the economies of scale work. But obviously we also need typology as well to meet the demands of end users, but also to create variation and have the opportunity for variation as well. So at the heart of it, we're talking about efficient standardization for design and manufacture and assembly. We've got really good examples if we look at the other sectors that produce products in terms of cars and watches. You know, you can produce both of these in either a factory or you can produce them by hand. But if you look at the car industry as an example, obviously you have a highly popular BMW 4 Series here, which is produced many thousands of times per year, 40,000 in the US alone. This is made up of a standard range of components, kit of parts, and obviously automated in terms of production on the factory line. You compare that to something like the Lamborghini Aventador, which sells obviously at a greater price than a BMW 4 Series at approximately $400,000 for the basic range, and only sells about 100 of these per year. So it's quite understandable why Lamborghini will not necessarily invest a significant amount of money and capital into an automated factory operation for such a highly bespoke and, in essence, expensive product. So that's something that we need to think about as an industry, but also maybe in housing particularly, when we think about the products that we're creating and how to make them efficiently, cost effectively, but also deliver a far superior product as well. So in terms of realigning, I guess, the construction sector to more manufacturing-led principles, there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of, I guess, get the base right. And from our experience, we found that actually we need to really approach our thinking like how manufacturers would and think about what they approach, the challenges that they face with. And that's, again, referring back to the idea of looking at potentially aligning some of the best things of traditional design with DFMA. We also need to understand our products. So using the language of products is not something that we normally do in housing, but again, as we begin to shift away from traditional towards manufacturing processes, we need to think about our homes more as products and how do we standardize them and understand them better to the minutest of details. I think we've also found that actually, rather than jumping head first and going straight to MMC as a solution, we really need to understand the products and design them first, and then select the MMC solution secondly. And this gives us a number of benefits, but I'll talk about that maybe a little bit at the end. And then also, when you're considering this type of, I guess, transition in terms of moving towards more manufacturing-led delivery, you need to think about the fact that this is something that's a little bit more of a, I guess, strategic, I guess, endeavor, and it does need to be considered in the scope of how much time such a program of work may take within an organization, where you're looking at engaging multiple stakeholders and investing potentially significant sums of capital over a very long period of time. So a lot of the experiences that we found, a lot of the engagements that we've had over the last 3.5 years, where we have looked at those who've successfully done this, they've been able to commit to a good roadmap, but that roadmap takes time, and typically we're looking at, you know, for varying organizations to different sizes, of course, but typically we've heard the numbers of 5, 6, 7 years transition periods for these roadmaps to really kind of come to fruition. It's something that we have taken in mind, and as a business we have committed to a long-term roadmap to deliver this. And then finally, as well, in delivering, homes as products, we're also thinking about the fact that we need to ensure that we don't necessarily get wedded to the idea that everything needs to be standardized and everything needs to be made offsite, but we can have things which can still be delivered traditionally and can be bespoke to an element, but we do try to get a good balance so that we are getting the economies of scale associated with standardized designs and production, but also have the ability and the flexibility to create things which need to be created traditionally or need to be a little bit more bespoke to add a bit more, I guess, flavor and uniqueness to ultimately what is for us, not just about creating homes, but also about creating great places as well. Okay, so in terms of, I guess, the journey, I'll just talk a little bit about maybe the 3 steps that we've taken as a bit of an overview to where we are today. So the first thing for us really was, as an organization, we had to kind of look at setting up a team that would be, I guess, responsible for developing the roadmap, but also implementing it and taking the business on this journey. So we've identified within a wider body of production strategy, we've identified a production innovation team to understand what our homes are. To plan the journey, like I said, using data analytics and information to create that informed roadmap. But also manage the challenges around how do we transition the business into this new way of thinking, managing culture and managing change. Innovation is often quite challenging in the sense that it can be quite disruptive to tried and tested ways of doing things. So often can be resisted if it is seen to be too much change in a short period of time. So it's something that we've managed more incrementally rather than looking to change things overnight. Okay, so in terms of the team, we sit within, in terms of my particular team, in production innovation, we sit within a wider team of production strategy, which also has teams that look after our product and technical specifications, our employer requirements, looking at our BIM team in terms of how do we integrate with them, but also looking at construction delivery in terms of health and safety. We also look a little bit widely at also how we look at the eventual delivery of these products from a sales and marketing perspective, and obviously in terms of procurement, making sure that actually in terms of our supply chains, they're engaged in the process and we can get the benefits of economies of scale as well. To get the project started in 2018, we did quite a bit of research in terms of looking at some of the homes that we were already delivering to inform the roadmap, as I mentioned earlier. So that was quite an interesting exercise and helped to kind of give us an idea as to what products we were looking to develop as an organization. So in terms of creating the plan, very illustratively, we've got an ambition to increase the number of homes that we deliver from a kind of very low level here up to a very kind of high level here in terms of over a 10-year period. And that's something which we've accepted, I guess, will take a bit of time, but we're starting off with a low level of pre-manufactured value at around 12.5%, and then increasing that over a number of years to hopefully what would be something nearer towards the 80, 70%, maybe even 90% in the future as well. We have 2 work streams taking place in terms of working with low-rise housing, in terms of timber frame housing, and then we have more of our urban sites, which are a bit more higher multi-story developments in and around London. So we're currently in year 4 now, and yeah, going according to plan, but it has been very incremental. So it has taken us 4 years to get to this point where we're now beginning to really look at the implementation phase of the work that we've done to date. So in terms of the 2 products that I mentioned earlier, in terms of low-rise housing and multi-story housing, we do have a very kind of illustrative plan which sets out generally how we look at trying to utilize the products that we're developing from an off-site perspective. So this is our high-level plan for the counties in terms of creating a range of products which we can apply onto multiple sites, and then apply a very basic level of, well, I say basic level, but very basically applying finishes which will be able to respond to multiple locations. And we have a range of options in terms of off-site solutions that will be enable us to create that variation that we needed to respond to different locations. Similarly, in the more urban sites for multi-rise buildings, we'd be looking at doing something similar with a range of flat typologies which could be put together, apply external finishes, and then also work with a range of off-site components within them to create the economies of scale. Internally, we don't envisage there being too much difference in terms of we would still have off-site manufactured products where they would look as they do traditionally, but hopefully far superior off-site manufactured products. But we're hoping to get obviously as well a far superior end product in terms of low-rise housing or multi-story developments as we're currently developing right now. So that's very kind of high level, I guess, storyboard in terms of timeline as to how we would look at developing those types of products. But critically, we have been working with a range of stakeholders in terms of consultants and also supply chain members to date. And we really do believe in the power of collaboration to really kind of make this kind of long and very challenging kind of roadmap come to the fore to deliver the benefits that we all want to see. Obviously, we're keeping abreast of what's happening in terms of supply chain and working with some of these already. But there is a lot of innovation taking place in the UK. And it is really good to see now that with the investment that's happened over the last few years, a lot of those companies are beginning to really make inroads and finding, good collaborations and good partnerships with like-minded organizations like clients like ourselves. As part of that collaborative working, we're also looking at how we look at setting up contractual agreements with our supply chains, with our consultants, to ensure that actually there's a bit more of a genuine kind of collaborative agreement in place, whereby they have an interest in delivering the very best products for their clients, but they also receive the benefit of working together collaboratively with others as well. So we're looking as an organization to begin investing more of our procurement into alliance contracts type arrangements, whereby we work with a number of partners over a long period of time to help them to develop our products and work better as a team. Okay, so in terms of delivering the plan, where are we at the moment? Well, just in the last year, we have been developing our first prototype. So this is something which, as an industry, we don't necessarily do that well, apart from maybe the odd sample on site and the odd sample delivered to site by a supply chain member. But we've actually taken the time over the last few years to spend a bit of time prototyping some of our products and really getting under the skin in terms of how they're made and how they need to be maintained and how they could be even deconstructed, and then also replaced and repaired post deconstruction. We prototype balconies and bathrooms, and it's been quite an interesting process working with the supply chain, but also working with our consultants to really understand how we could better create really good standardized offsite products. We've also been delivering a range of guidance documents for our teams internally, but also for our consultant teams, and looking at not just designs, but also around procurement, around delivery, around logistics, and getting into a lot more detail to really understand the products and to get the very best of this initial upfront investment that we've made in developing the products. I'm just going through a range of those now, but also guidance documentation for development of standard houses and looking into a lot of detail there in terms of how they're made up and the various constituents parts. Likewise with flat typologies as well, and doing some really good work with our consultant team on that to date. So in terms of where we are as a team right now, we've got a range of products which we're beginning to launch into the business and beginning to implement on our first few sites. So we do have our first standard house typologies. Our flat types are still going through the final bits of, I guess, iteration in terms of getting those ready for adoption. But we do have our first range of bathroom typologies, balconies, utility cupboards, and kitchen layouts as well. So we're beginning to move into a bit more of a manufacturing space whereby we have a range and portfolio of products, rather than just designing every scheme afresh every time. And to support the development of those products, we do have a bit of a guidance documentation strategy, so codifying the process in terms of how do we actually look at applying these and giving our teams the confidence to be able to take individual products or collectively put them together and actually begin to work from an overarching strategy, selecting a range of products from a house type or flat typology and beginning to look at the components that make up those and considerations from an offsite perspective as to how to actually implement them successfully as well. Okay, so in terms of the delivery of our first houses, we're very much, again, like I said, working with supply chain partners in terms of key stakeholders. So Stuart Milne, we've been working with in the counties to kind of help us with the implementation of our standard house types on our county sites, and that's been going really well to date. I'm really looking forward to seeing more of this come to the fore. And we're looking at obviously continue to build relationships with supply chain members, especially for our London works, which will be coming to the fore in the coming years. So for us, in terms of key kind of lessons learned, we recognize that obviously there needs to be an appreciation from a manufacturing perspective of the need for continuous improvement. And that means continuing to recycle and cycle information back into the development process. That involves obviously prototyping and continuing to update our homes, all as we would do almost like a manufacturer would do in terms of looking at you know, the creation of things like Dysons, whereby prototyping is obviously a very important part of what they do, but also continuous iteration of the development of these products. And likewise, looking at it like a phone, whereby you have, you know, the very first iPhones, we're now on to, you know, whatever it is, iPhone 12, 13, I can't quite remember, but we want to look at our homes and know that in 5 years' time, we may have, you know, house 2.25, for example, and it's gone through a number of iterations to get to that point. I think in terms of appreciating, what's happening in the marketplace, continue to collaborate and work with others to look at obviously market opportunities and technological innovations, and investing with confidence that actually, with collaborating and in other industry players who can make a real difference in terms of improving the quality of homes and buildings that we provide. And like I said, we're obviously, big champions of collaboration, and obviously hence we're presenting today, but we have been doing a lot of work with the industry in terms of, Innovate UK. I'm currently working on 2 projects there, the DFMA Business Intelligence Toolkit, but also MCH. And obviously we've been collaborating with the likes of the EFL and others in this space so far. So it's been a really interesting journey, and looking forward to what's coming up. So just a few final tips for anybody who's, I guess, looking as an organization to maybe take on or commence an innovation roadmap. For us, it's about obviously planning what that looks like and taking the time and appreciating that it does take a lot of time and commitment to get it off the ground, but also then implement it as well. It does involve a lot of engagement and an approach that is much more about multi-projects rather than individual projects, so that there is that holistic approach as an organization. It doesn't have to be, you know, all or nothing. I think we appreciate that offsite is something which will have a definite benefit to our business in terms of our delivery, but we also recognize there'll still be a place for some element of traditional and bespoke in order to address some of the placemaking requirements that we need as well in terms of urban design. And we also kind of think, what would Apple do? So, you know, Apple are very much around innovation and around collaboration and around pushing the boundaries. But also, they're also very methodical and prepared to take their time before they launch their next product. So we'd rather undertake the testing, the prototyping, the due diligence, and release that product at the right time, rather than necessarily releasing it first just to be first. And then finally, working together. Collaborating is a really big part of our collective success. So we definitely encourage that for anybody on taking this journey. So that is it for me. Thank you very much.
Lamre, thank you very much. That was absolutely excellent. What I'd like to do now, we've got about 20 minutes left for our panelists to comment and explore a little bit further some of the issues we talked about there. So if my colleague could probably spotlight the 4 panelists that we have now, that would be really great. But while spotlighting those, could we also put up the Menti, please, and the next Menti question. The next Menti question we have for everybody is, looking forward over the next 10 years, what percentage of new homes do you think will be built using offsite technologies within 10 years? So interesting. And why see the results coming in there? Can I bring in Nigel Osteen from Hawkins Brown. And Nigel, I saw Hawkins Brown were up there as one of the organisations collaborating with L'Homme, which was absolutely great. But Nigel, how would you answer this question in terms of what percentage of homes will be built using offsite in 10 years' time?
Hi everyone. Well, I think this is interesting, but I think it's probably a slightly deeper, as often is the case with these things. I think we look slightly deeper to get to the answer. So quite what that percentage will be is difficult to say. But I think the first thing we have to do is define what we mean by off-site. So in the UK, we're starting to use the term pre-manufactured value. And you know, so for example, actually Lanray did show this on his slides, and he was indicating that L&Q are going along a journey to get up to a very high level of pre-manufactured value. But the other thing is that we have now set out 7 different categories of modern methods of construction, and I think the reality is that it's never any, or it's generally not any one of those categories. It's often a blend of those categories. So we talk about volumetric, which we often term modular, which is category 1. Now, that's a relatively small part of the market at the moment, partly because the manufacturing industry needs to carry on building. It's an important part, but it's not the only part. And we've got a number of other categories. So we talk about category 5, for example, is podded bathrooms and 3-dimensional service, mechanical and electrical service risers, and various other structures like this. And I think what we need to do is start thinking as designers, but we're architects, so as designers, what we try to do is right at the start of the project, at the early concept design stage, is simply to think, how are we going to build this, and what categories of MMC might be appropriate for this. And in that way, we are looking to increase the amount of pre-manufactured value, but it's selecting the right system for the job. So I think we need to think about what are the systems we're talking about, what do we actually mean by offsite, and we've got to get a clearer definition for our industry so that we have a common language.
Thanks, Nigel. Just picking up on that piece about collaboration as well, and when the designer needs to get involved. Lanray was talking about the collaboration with the professional teams, the design teams, but also with the manufacturers as well. How important from a designer's perspective is that collaboration piece?
I think it's fundamental, and as a practice, we're making some efforts to get to know the manufacturers in the UK and elsewhere. And as I say, without often the architect is the only consultant in the room right at the beginning of the project. We always like to have engineers and manufacturers on board as soon as possible, but sometimes that's not the case. So it's important that we understand what the various systems are and what the capabilities are of the industry as a whole, so that we can help guide the project in that direction and not end up designing something which, by virtue of the way that it's designed, has ruled out any particular system of category of modern methods of construction. So it's really critical that we do that. And we often talk about, and again, I think Lanray touched on this really, of developing a manufacturing mindset so that we're understanding right from the start, in principle, how we're going to be building the buildings, and you know, and considering it. But perhaps an analogy would be Lego. And thinking about how we might assemble the different parts of the building, rather than designing it first and then thinking how we're going to build it.
If we just have our next question on the Menti, please, and then in that next question, we're looking at our customers actually interested in how houses are built, and perhaps I'll come to you first of all, Nigel, but then I'll move on to John from a procurement point of view. Are customers interested in how their houses are built and their residential units?
Well, I think probably not most of the time. I think they're really more interested in issues like, we always talk about location is very important, and really they're not so interested in what's behind the walls, but really what they're experiencing in terms of the space and the facilities and so on. However, in the UK, we have had the tragedy of the Grenfell Tower fire, where many people lost their lives, and it's had a fundamental effect and is having a fundamental effect on our industry to basically to improve quality in the broadest sense. And I think that people, because this has been so public, I think the customers, the consumers of our houses are realise that this is an issue, and it's an issue for people in existing buildings as well, who are having trouble getting insurance for their buildings as a result of this situation. So I think the sort of short answer is they're not too interested, but actually I think it's becoming more of an interest to them. And I think that can only be a good thing if we can get people to be more interested in this and to help build up a consensus of opinion about how we go and how we build more homes, which we definitely need in the UK at least.
John, you're a procurement framework. Obviously, a lot of your customers are local authorities or social housing clients who are interested, I think, in offsite, aren't they? And there's this presumption of offsite in the UK. How does Lomre touched on it again in terms of the forms of contract and this collaboration we've got? How does that change when we're looking at fundamentally a different relationship between designer, client and manufacturer to the traditional relationship we get, which moves from project to project?
Yeah, it was interesting, Ian. You finished that sentence with project to project, and Lanray was talking about product, and I think that's how we see the industry moving from project to product. So we're designing a product for our customers. And the analogy was with the iPhone was good, I think, because we don't want to design it every time we have a project. We don't want to redesign the product every time. So for housing, the idea is to design a product and stick with that product, and therefore to reduce the cost of design, to try to develop standardized house types as much as we can, so that we're not redesigning the same house type time and time again. So we get some cost there. So that collaboration in the early stages between the architect and the manufacturer is very important, as Nigel has said. But we do have to treat it like an iPhone, and know once we've designed that product, then that's going to have a life before we have to look at the design again. And I think with the customers, again, you're right. The different customers have different levels of interest. Private sector customers are obviously going to have a different view because of their house is also an investment. Whereas on social housing, the customer, the housing developer, the social housing authority, has an interest in the whole life value. This is one of the reasons why offsite is popular with social landlords, because when social landlords tend to have a longer term view, looking at whole life costing, and they're building to rent very often. So there are financial incentives for the social housing provider in building more quickly on site, because they're getting the rent, they're getting rental income quicker. And of course, the residents in the houses are interested in comfort, and are therefore, particularly now with low carbon, interested in both energy efficiency, both from a comfort point of view and from fuel poverty, to have reduced bills. So I think they're interested in the outcomes of a better building rather than the building itself.
John, that's very well said. Lanray, can I just come back on a question which has been asked on the chat? You had that great slide which talked about pre-manufactured value, which Nigel alluded to. The question has been, where are we at currently with pre-manufactured value? And I think you were saying we're probably at 25–30%. And where are we aiming to get in terms of increasing pre-manufactured value?
Yeah, good question. There's probably a different kind of number of schools of thought on this in terms of where are we. I think when we, as a business, undertook a little bit of research a few years ago as to understanding our baseline, we estimated that we were sitting somewhere in the region around 12.5% PMV. Others have suggested actually, across the board in terms of where the industry was at that time and maybe is, we're probably sitting somewhere near in the region around 20–25%. I think it's going to obviously vary depending on different organizations, but in terms of the direction of travel, it's definitely up. It's looking like with the new kind of programs from our perspective that come out in terms of funding programs that are incentivizing the likes of ourselves, social housing organization RSLs, and others to produce more housing or buildings with off-site products to gain associated funding, then that can only improve the situation. So I'd imagine in a few years' time we should be seeing that number, if it's not already heading there, well beyond 30% into the 40%, hopefully.
Thanks, Landry. Two more questions which we'll ask on the Menti, and I'd like to bring in our colleagues from France, Alban and Nabil, to comment on these two questions. One is the question about whose role is it to sell the benefits of off-site housing? And I think probably John has already answered that about consumers are actually interested in the outcomes of off-site rather than the process of off-site. But is it the role of the manufacturer, the customer, the designer, or the contractor? So please vote away on that. And I don't know if Alban, you'd like to come in on that, in terms of whose role is it to sell the benefits of off-site construction? And maybe Nabil, you'd like to come on in the next question, which is about what are the key obstacles that you're seeing in France to overcoming or to accelerating the off-site? So Alban, if you'd like to come in first of all, talking about off-site housing, who needs to sell the benefits to the consumer?
Vous m'entendez? Oui, bonjour.
Good morning.
C'est bon? Oui, ouais, excusez-moi.
I'm sorry. I'm here assuring the question number 4. What are we doing to reduce the obstacles related to the construction? In certain countries, the legislation in France is a break for the development of construction of site, because if we make construction on the site, we use the engineering methodology.
Dessiner sa maison.
So we are using personal construction for one person. We have to use an architect who is an architect, external architect, which is working on the site, construction site in France, and this is make a complementary advice in the response of industry of construction. We can conceive an industrial product that we will be using in a matter of industry, and we have to use the client of modifications that needed, which is really difficult, like we have just said immediately. For the regulators for the iPhone, to make the adaptations, it is really complicated out there. There is a second subject associated to the regulatory. The massification effects to reduce costs. In the factory, we have multiple factors, but the volume effect that we can have competitive products and for high quality on the market.
Merci Alban. Donc la réglementation qu'on retrouve.
The regulation that we are finding regularly as a break in a number of construction sites, in different visions of massification, which will make costs more efficient and more of. This is a great fear in the construction world. This is explained by Alan, by the presentation of L&Q, of standardized elements, really adapted for different regions. This is the way that we have to go through. Thank you.
C'est à moi?
Alors, Yann, je vous bascule en anglais. So, Yann?
Yeah, I think we're coming to our last 5 minutes, and I'm conscious that Nabil, we haven't brought you in yet. So in terms of accelerating the level of offsite in France, would you like to have a final word just to say what you see the obstacles are in terms
Okay. Bon, moi je pense que les obstacles sont multiples. Bon,
I think the obstacles are multiple. To develop the offsite construction, we have to make our goal in terms of the client, not the inverse. Whether the regulations are and the factories locations. I think the break is on the legislation's level, and there is other. We have other contracts and the plans, and we have really different holes in this level. And in certain promoters, they on a financial level, on viability product, and also on the global performance. I'm not asking whether timber is better than steel or cement. I am looking for performance, and in terms of comfort and quality of spaces, on the regarding the client, and conformity of acoustic regulations and certifications. The idea is how to have a final result, and what I have constated and noticed through offsite constructions of more of 7 years, I can say that at a certain moment we cannot find actors that may make sustainable work, and to make through the actors and make the plans adequate for the construction, and the way to make these products in modular construction also that we have made. They are replicable from an architect, and this is quite difficult regarding the intellectual property, and it is not replicable anywhere anymore after this property. All the ecosystem which is affected by this idea, I think today this is quite doing well regarding the added value, which is limited. And the problematic is really more complex. Second subject concerning the preoccupations for the social buyer. Are we able to certify that a building 3D certified is really sustainable for different clients, and it is really solid to assure that? I think the idea and the goal is not to have the advantages of certain construction modes. I think we have to show the client's findings at the final. I think the problem is here. The breaks, we have a lot of breaks, and the breaks of financial resources as well. In terms of process on the 3D, on the website, on the site, nothing make a guarantee of the fabricator, the manufacturer that will maintain negotiations as a promoter. To make at the end, to find ourselves at the end in front of an impasse. On different projects, we are not there yet. Particularly, I have appreciated the slides of and the presentation of Ranley, who have englobed all the characteristics of the construction work. To say after that the benefits that we can take regarding the direct client, the manufacturer regarding the team of assemblage and construction and other stakeholders, and also to sell the products not in terms of site but in terms of client. For certain clients are really quite good. He is a particular investor. From this point, I think we can get it. Thank you, Nabil. This is really interesting. And I appreciate your point of view that we have to start from the client. This is unrealized buildings, and also evocate the branch that is not really developed yet. I have to call back that the construction of site, remind us of the egg and the chicken. The market at the end have not yet shown interest in offsite construction and progressed in other ways, and we can really appreciate with Laundry and L&Q. They understood that the industry have take the right path to make this successful, and I think this have to go both ways on the supply chain to make solutions durable and with the better quality. And I can see from responses on Menti, we had people that think construction of site will be more developed in the future, and they are convicted that certain actors will collaborate and work together to make the progress of site construction. Thank you for your presentation. I have one last word. The context in France is really complicated regarding other countries. We are not pragmatic. In other countries there are solutions, but here it is not available. Here in France, it's really a little bit difficult. Nabil, we are progressing, and we're having a webinar about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, Nabil. In fact, thank you for all of our speakers today. We've slightly overrun, and I apologize for that, because you're all probably waiting to go into your next Zoom meeting or Teams meeting. I've really enjoyed the presentations and the comments from all of the panels today. As always, I think the session could have probably been 4 hours long with the quality of comments that we've had from and quality of discussions that we've had from our audience. So thank you for that. My colleague Naomi is just putting into the chat a link to follow to give feedback. This is the first time we've done a bilingual conference between the offsite school in France and the offsite school in the UK. So always welcome your feedback to see what we can do better next time. And on that note, just click onto that form there. You'll see the feedback. And on that note, a final thank you to all of our contributors and all of our audience, and look to see you soon on another call. Thank you.